All right, take one of my talk about fourth and fifth generation warfare. I'm doing a new video format right now, new camera too, and we're going to talk a little bit about what when we talk about first, second, third, fourth generation warfare. Now, according to Wikipedia, and you can look this up yourself, we look up fourth generation warfare in Wikipedia. We get to an article which goes over the term having been started by a team of United States analysts, including William Lind, to describe warfare's return to a decentralized form in terms of generational modern warfare. And what these guys talk about is a return to a decentralized form of warfare, or basically people's warfare. And that was differentiated between nation-state warfare and conflicts of subnational, transnational groups. And then as they go into their other definitions, which again you can look up on Wikipedia, so I don't want to be too redundant about that. First generation warfare, tactics, line and column warfare. Second generation was tactics of linear fire movement. Okay, so after that little interruption, so fourth generation warfare and different generations of warfare, according to the stuff on Wikipedia. First generation, second generation was indirect fire, basically maneuver warfare, and we would talk about that as being like the Civil War, first modern war, U.S. Civil War between the states. But that was also kind of a warfare in depth, in that both the civilian populations and the military were organized and motivated to conduct the war. And that's also where we got to see a lot of use of civilian irregular forces that also fought each other, which blended into third generation warfare, which is a lot of guerrilla warfare, but it's still relatively open conflict. You know who your friends and enemies are. And generally speaking, the winner is declared by, you know, who got to kill a bunch of the enemy, and then at the negotiating table, somebody openly declares who the winners or losers are, what the legitimacy of the status quo is. The post-conflict status quo is pretty well spelled out in a relatively formal basis, even in third generation guerrilla warfare. And obviously the United States had a lot invested in that. For example, Guerrilla Warfare Special Forces Operations. It's a really common book, not classified, not secret, pretty textbook stuff for the way this goes, and it's available in a lot of places. We get into fourth generation warfare, all of a sudden we start seeing a lot less of the how-to out there, and it's because it becomes more complex, but in other ways it returns to a little bit older methods of warfare, let's say kingdom versus kingdom, people versus people, and you can actually take some lessons on that from the Bible. And that's why the guys who termed the phrase, you know, would talk about David and Goliath, they would talk about some of the biblical conflicts that are recorded between the Hebrew people and their rivals in the ancient world. And I would have to say that we also need to go to a technologically driven fifth generation warfare, which has a lot of parallels to ancient times, but a more esoteric and obscure variant of ancient times warfare, where we a lot of times classified it as witchcraft. We would classify it as spiritual warfare, things like that. And before we start really talking about hocus pocus on this stuff, and we look at the parallels between conflict models in Kabbalah, or some of the things that the Masonic groups might profess to study, or things, the Tibetan stuff and some of that, I'm not necessarily talking about spells and incantations in their original sense, but how they would apply to the modern world. And there's been some YouTube videos and some other stuff which goes to a term called transhumanism. Transhumanism talks about the next few steps in human evolution And not just human evolution, but the evolution of the environment around us. And one thing that you probably know quite a bit about is the world around us. How much of it is determined by the internet? How much of it is determined by the transmission of our thoughts throughout the world, the transmission of things that we say, of programs that we write, of codes and incantations, and how they interact with the world. And we could talk about how, let's say, a 13th century monk locked in a cell would do codes and incantations and secret knowledge, and how it might affect the rest of the world. And we'd think, well, okay, but Nietzsche would tell us most of the time later on, as he would examine all of that, he'd say, well, that's foolishness. Nietzsche knew the world around him. Freud knew the world around him, and would say, okay, that's mostly foolishness. All these people, we don't know what's going on in the guy's head versus what's going on in the world around him, and we have no way of really reconciling the two except through more intangibles like faith. And you can't prove it. We don't know. When we have a guy who's locked up in a room alone with the internet doing series of incantations and expressions of will, all of a sudden that has much more of an effect on the real world. And what happens when we apply that to artificial intelligence? All of a sudden we have a created thing that will express its will into the world according to its creator. And that's where we have a return among the people who have studied it to some of the old Kabbalah traditions, some of the old knowledge of that stuff. And we have to realize that, okay, what is somebody 1,000 years ago, why would they even know about this stuff? Where does this come from? How would they have a clue? And we have to wonder, okay, where did it come from? And how much of it was a result of some sort of a divine or less than divine transfer of knowledge, or a development of a type of mentality which somebody would carry throughout the ages as part of their genetically encoded propensity for certain types of intelligence. And that's where we have to look at fifth generation warfare being intelligence driven. It's going to be largely intangible, which during the age of the gun, okay, intangible warfare, who cares, right? When we get into the age of the computer, intangible warfare all of a sudden becomes pretty, it matters a lot. We look at even third generation warfare of the Cold War. It would heat up from time to time. There's a lot of rhetoric going forth. There's a lot of propaganda. We look at terrorism warfare. Terrorism is largely about how to get a target media, how to get a target audience to pay attention to an issue. Second generation warfare, maneuver warfare. If you wanted to damage your enemy's economy, you bombed his factories. Okay, first generation warfare. You wanted to damage the enemy's economy, their credibility. You bombed their factories. You attacked their economy. You attacked their ability to recruit, train troops. You attacked their ability to pay their troops. You attack their ability to breed. You knock out portions of their population. They can no longer produce offspring to have a population to even conduct warfare with. When we talk about fifth generation warfare and the application of artificial intelligence, we have to look at the environment that so many people exist in, that so many people's personal economy depends upon now, which is the internet, which is this thing where the monk locked in a cell speaking incantations can affect the world if he has access to that universal mind. And all of a sudden, all this stuff from these Tibetans, from the Kabbalah, from all these guys, all of a sudden it's a lot less full of shit. In fact, there's a lot of that stuff now, which 30 years ago would have been considered secret knowledge, now is common knowledge. Most teenagers who have played World of Warcraft have a better understanding of magic and magical incantations and sort of that stuff than what would have been considered very secret knowledge 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now, is it relevant within the aspect of the games? Maybe, maybe not. Within the aspect of ethics, a lot of people would say, well, as soon as somebody starts casting a spell, that's the initiation of an attack. If we play World of Warcraft and we see that somebody has initiated an attack with a distance spell, that's an initiation of attack. The game automatically acknowledges that the attack has begun, and the program then goes into a conflict mode. Let's say your interaction with another character, whether it's a player character or a non-player character, the conflict begins at spell casting. And I want to go into that with the way artificial intelligence, in a way these things can have an effect on our lives and how to protect ourselves from it.